Central American country. We have some wonderful guests tonight, and I'll introduce them to you in just a second. I wanted to give you a little bit of background about Honduras, and then our guests are going to give you a lot more. And we're going to invite you to consider joining a delegation to observe the Honduran elections, but we'll get to all of that in good time. Please stick with us for the whole thing, and you'll get to hear the whole thing. You can also watch later this video. This will be available to share with friends, and you will get a copy of it if you're listening now. On November 30th this year, Hondurans go to the polls to choose a new president, Congress, and municipal authorities. The stakes are high. The charged political climate of recent months has given rise to serious concerns about democracy eroding as malign forces maneuver. And of course, some of those malign forces are in the United States, and we're going to talk plenty about that tonight. Just 4 years ago, Hondurans voted decisively to end a series of US-backed post-coup d'etat governments. President Juan Orlando Hernández was the last in a series of those US-backed golpista or coup presidents. And in the wake of his party's resounding defeat, he was charged with narco-trafficking and extradited to the United States. In the 4 years since, the country has grappled with instability. Conservative factions inside Honduras are echoing the rhetoric of key members of the US Congress, particularly within the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We'll hear more about that too, raising concerns about external influence. And although the State Department under Marco Rubio insists the US will not interfere in foreign elections, Honduran social movements and international allies remain skeptical and are very concerned. To discuss these matters, we have with us tonight Lucia Vigil Sabe. She's an analyst, researcher, and member of the technical team of the Center for the Study of Democracy, CESPAD. CESPAD is an organization that Global Exchange has worked with for many years. For the 2025 electoral process, she serves as the national coordinator for CESPAD's observation. We're also joined by Karen Spring, who is the Honduras-based coordinator of the Honduras Solidarity Network. As in 2021, she's working alongside Global Exchange and CESPAD during the November 2025 elections to assist with monitoring and observation. Karen has lived and worked in Honduras for over 15 years and is currently a PhD student at the University of Ottawa in Canada, doing that remotely, I believe. And Amelia Frank Vitali is also with us tonight. She is an assistant professor of anthropology and international affairs at Princeton University, an anthropologist of migrant violence and violence in Central America and Mexico. Her forthcoming book, Leave It If You Can, explores how Honduran youth navigate life after deportation and resist border externalization. We'll start with Lucy tonight. Lucy, please tell us a little bit about your organization, CESPAD, and tell us as well, give us some background to these elections. Who are the candidates? What are the forces that are at play? And from the point of view of civil society and social movements, what are some of the biggest risks that Honduras faces at this moment?
Primero que todo,
first of all, I want to thank Global Exchange for all of their work, for their virtual and on-site work in our countries, protecting democracy in the Central American region. Thank you, Amelia, and this entire team for participating in this event. We're very excited. And what's coming up next, every election is complicated in our country. And because of that, we're going to strengthen, or we're going to discuss how that process is being moved forward. CESPAD, the Center for Study for Democracy, is a civil society organization that was established over 10 years ago. It came into being after the state coup, and it shares knowledge, research, carries out surveys, and provides monitoring in specific territories related to environmental, ecological justice, public policies to fight corruption, and also the promotion for human rights and the strengthening of public institutions, advocating for increased budgets and in other areas to strengthen the state of law. Something that is a challenge for us and has to do with monitoring and observations has to do with democracy and human rights. In this area, we carry out monitoring for elections and also the observation exercises. In 2017, we launched a first survey about people's perceptions, and we were asking what candidates could be on the horizon for the next elections. And then in 2021, with Global Exchange, we carried out electoral observations, election observations, with an international team with a youth team organization. And then we did a second round of monitoring. This was electoral monitorings that we've been carrying out since December of last year. And on our webpage, you can find all of those reports, everything that came out from the legal terrain. Responding to Ted's question about what are the powers in play and what are the risks and what are we observing in CESPAD? First, we find ourselves in an election that involves three political parties, Liberty and Refoundation. Reci Moncada is the candidate. Then the Liberal Party with Salvador Naranja, who for 2021 was part of the alliance against Orlando Hernández from the National Party. And now he is a candidate for the Liberal Party. And then there's the National Party with Nasria Fura. These three political parties, historically very much present in our history, the National and Liberal parties are part of that. They've exchanged power. They effectively take turns. And then Liberty and Reformation comes after, is developed after the state coup. So it's a much more recent entity, and it's connected to different social sectors. So these are the three actors that are disputing or challenging each other. We also have some content that we've produced. You can read those. It's something from May 9th, 2025, something that showed us the institutional fragility, how fragile things are in the national electorate process. There was a lot of errors made, a lot of logistic problems, which made it complicated or limited people's ability to reach the polls. And so it reflected the fragile state of the electoral process, but I think we learned a lot of lessons and we've improved on them. And so civil society, it has their demands, and there's a lot of polarization there. There's different narratives and discourses. There's hate rhetoric that is resonating. It makes up part of the national media landscape, and it impacts the citizens. In 2021, we had Rixi Moncat, who is now the candidate for the Liberty and Reform Party. And in 2021, this alliance really had motivated and created a new dynamic. But what happened in 2025 at the polls that shook people's trust, well, there's going to be a state institution that is going to be responding to what happened in the past. As far as the risks, we have the issue that we've identified principal risks: interference from the political parties, the way that they might impact institutionality. Would be carried out by people in political parties or in the government. People are concerned over their own interests, and it fragments the process. And it's not just a technical issue, it's a party contestation, and each party is trying to do what they can. The other risk has to do with political violence against candidates. This is a very complicated situation, and it involves political authorities, and then also digital manipulation, communications manipulation. A lot of times people are posting results that are not accredited or verified. People take the role of being formal spokespersons when they shouldn't be. And all of this allows the media to take advantage of the situation and foment polarization. Another issue, we are in the electoral process. We're seeing that some of these do not have are not being supported financially with Orlando Hernández in the financing there. There are the drug cartels that there's a concern about that. And so we're looking at the electoral process again and investigating where the funds are coming from. What this means is that the political parties are beholden to people that finance their campaigns. And so there's the risk that organized crime can finance a candidate's campaign, and then they would be owing favors to those actors. So those are just some of the risks, and we can talk about other ones.
Thank you very much, Lucia. And yes, we're going to come back to you, and we want to hear the invitation to people all over the world to come and observe in Honduras with CISPOD in a minute. We're going to move to Emilia Frank Vitali. Emilia, your research focuses on the complex relationship between immigration and electoral politics, probably in the United States, but in this case in Central America and especially Honduras. And we're one day away from the Supreme Court, making one of the most horrendous decisions that I can remember regarding immigration, and basically legalizing ethnic profiling and class profiling to take people out. But in this moment, in terms of what you're seeing in Honduras and the relationship with immigration, what picture can you paint for us?
Sure. First, thank you so much, all of you, for inviting me to be here. It's really an honor for me. I think between Karen and Lucia, they know everything, and I hope I can add a little bit of something, but really I just learned so much from listening to both of you, and I'm so delighted to be here. Migration right now from the United States, the situation is dire. I mean, it's really a sort of new take on state terror, in terms of the way the United States is thinking about people who have migrated and future immigrants. And I think the relationship between the United States and Honduras is complicated in many, many ways, and one of those pieces is migration. In 2017, in the elections, when Juan Orlando Hernández stayed for a second term despite fraud and the inconstitutionality of that, folks in the communities I was working in the sort of urban margins of the Sula Valley and San Pedro Sula, neighborhoods that have really high rates of violence, are thought to be neighborhoods that are controlled by gangs and have high incidence of homicide, places that are considered really dangerous. In a lot of these neighborhoods, the young guys who had been deported and who were being deported in high numbers decided to wait. They decided to wait to not leave the country again, as they would have done in other moments, because there was a sense of hope that something might change, that something could be different. I remember a young man said to me at that time, lo único que nos ofrece Juan Orlando es el pozo. The only thing that Juan Orlando offers us is a maximum security prison, basically. And so there was a sense of in these colonias of a possibility of not migrating anymore if change happened. And, you know, fast forward to 2 elections later, and in these same communities, I think the feeling of hope is not present anymore. There's a sense of sort of abandonment. People are still leaving Honduras, and people are still getting deported to Honduras. But I think that sort of in this situation, the change in the U.S. politics and rhetoric is less immediately what shapes people's choices about migration than the immediate conditions around them. The one thing I will say about Honduras in particular and the United States at this moment, and the elections, is the way that TPS, temporary protected status, has been weaponized as a political rhetorical tool in ways that I think are very dishonest. So I'm sure everyone here knows, but temporary protected status has was given to Hondurans who were in the United States in the wake of Hurricane Mitch and has been renewed periodically since then. And the Trump administration not too long ago announced that that was going to be canceled, that would end. And there's been a lot of talk from different circles in Honduras that is Xiomara Castro's fault, that she has not done the job as she ought to have to get TPS extended. A lot of people in Honduras were saying, like, look, El Salvador got its TPS extended and we didn't, and that's because Bukele is better friends with Trump and Xiomara is not. And that, like, is an entire misreading of the situation. First of all, the TPS for El Salvador was extended during the end days of the Biden administration, so it wasn't even a choice that Trump made. But it also really overestimates the extent to which there was ever any possibility of TPS for anyone being extended under this current government. This government is engaged in this sort of massive delegalization of people that just is, we've never seen anything quite like it before in the United States. And Hondurans are, I think, a small group for the White House. But it's part of a much broader plan. But I have seen among a lot of communities in Honduras, and certainly the opponents of the government, really weaponizing that as a way to say, look, this government doesn't care about you. This government isn't doing what it needs to do. And that is just not I think, an honest assessment, but I think works for a lot of people. I think a lot of people feel really personally betrayed by the fact that TPS has been canceled. It's for so many, it's a small group of Hondurans who have TPS compared to the number of Hondurans who are in the United States. But symbolically, I think it's really important for a lot of people. And then I'll just say one other thing about, I think there was a time during the first Trump administration when Hondurans were the target of their anti-immigrant rhetoric. Hondurans were the face of the enemy for Trump the first time around. And I think that changed the relationship between migration and the population of Honduras in a way. And this time around, I think there are a lot of elements in Honduran society who don't have to feel as directly attacked because the rhetoric now is really about Venezuelans in a way that sort of aligns with elite right-wing positionality in Honduras, right? As opposed to feeling somehow also personally attacked by the language coming out of the White House. Venezuelans are a sort of easy target and allows those forces to be on the same side of this. And I will just say one final thing about this. We do see Venezuelans not migrating as much as before. There does seem to be a real impact from the rhetoric and the policy in the United States. And I'm not sure we see that same thing with Hondurans. Just recently, some of the new numbers suggest that Central Americans are once again the largest group of people, Hondurans chief among them. being encountered at the US-Mexico border. Just to say that Honduran migration is sort of a steady, even if not as visible, even if not as much in the public eye, it's not really something that's abated. I'll leave it there for now. I hope that was a couple of useful pieces of reference.
That was great, Amelia, and thank you so much. And we'll be back in a minute to hear about your experiences on the previous observation in Honduras. Karen, I know you have a lot for us today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing. Can you put another layer on this question of the relationships in the hemisphere, and particularly between the United States and Honduras in this complicated moment? And I won't say more. I'll just let you take it from there, please.
Thanks, Ted. Well, if I do miss something, which I'm sure I will, I hope you'll definitely chime in afterwards, or feel free to interrupt me as well. So I think that U.S. intervention and the relationship between the U.S. and Honduras, it's always been, one of extreme power dynamic, unequal power relations, the U.S. throwing their weight around to deeply influence I would say almost every decision in Honduras, to an extreme degree that sometimes you just it continues to astonish me how much power the U.S. has in so many decisions in Honduras and the situation in Honduras. And I think the risk for U.S. interference in this election process is really high, and it's a little bit different than it's been in the past. And I would say that because Honduras and the Honduran elections for months now have been placed in this global geopolitical dynamic that is extremely polarizing and extremely manipulated. And it's mostly around comparing and trying to, mostly by the right wing, basically trying to give the impression that everything that's happening in Honduras under the Castro government is what's going on in Venezuela, it's what's going on in Cuba. And these are very powerful messaging coming from the United States, and it perfectly matches the narrative that is coming from the pro-coup forces in Honduras. You can call them right-wing forces in Honduras, but I feel like it's almost better to say pro-coup forces. So these are the forces that were in favor of the coup in 2009. These are the wealthy families that have long dominated Honduras, the Honduran economy, the Honduran political environment. These are forces that are civil society organizations that have managed to take control of the narrative in a lot of the dominant media in Honduras that are largely funded by the US government, to basically create these narratives of this civil society group. And I think when Lucia introduces CESPAD as a civil society organization, for me, CESPAD really is a civil society organization and not these deeply US funded NGOs that have so much ability to control the narrative and influence the narrative in Honduras. And so I just wanted to throw a really quick slideshow up just to give people some of this, a good overview, or just some details about what the US is saying, or what the buildup to these elections has been, and just how dangerous this kind of messaging is. So recently, the US Attorney General talked about how Honduras, Mexico, and Guatemala are being used as an air bridge to transport drugs from Venezuela. Again, always Venezuela. Since the Venezuelan elections, the Honduran pro-coup media have been saying, they heavily covered the Venezuelan election like you wouldn't believe, trying to say, oh, I hope this doesn't happen in Honduras. Honduras has relations with Venezuela. Oh, there's a big potential of this happening in Honduras. And so you see this same overlap of narratives. Recently, on September 4th, so last week, the US announced that they were going to sort of act against Central Americans that they see as working with or undermining the rule of law because of their relationship with China. And then just really quickly, just for time, for months now, actually since for the last 4 years, basically, there's been really key representatives in the US that have used their positions to heavily influence just like how things are discussed in Honduras, and the pro-coup government the pro-coup forces in Honduras are loving it. So one of the worst is Representative Salazar from Florida. She's constantly tweeting about Honduras, saying that it's like Venezuela, it's like Cuba, we need to get rid of these people, we need to coup them. Speaking about the Honduran president Castro. And there's been some terrible tweets from the US House Foreign Affairs. I'm going to throw those up really quickly. I'll put these links in the chat later for people that want to follow up. But so the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House are putting out these, again, recent events signal the country is trending towards the authoritarian path taken by Venezuela and Nicaragua, threatens US stability and security. I mean, it's just tremendous how much, they're trying to undermine any sort of democracy or sovereignty of Hondurans to decide about what happens in the elections and what happens on a daily basis in the country regarding just any sort of policy. So constantly trying to compare them to Venezuela, and I'll put these links in the chat. And I just want to say really quickly that I don't want to say that everything that the Castro government does is perfect, and I don't want to say that our electoral observation mission isn't taking sides in these elections, and we see it as what's going on in Honduras is it requires a very nuanced analysis, because I think that there is what is shaped or what is sort of presented as a progressive government in power in Honduras. What happens when progressive governments take power in the region, I think this is when it becomes very difficult to really understand what's happening. I think people see it as it's very polarizing, especially when you watch it from outside. People say, oh, there's this really progressive government in Honduras, but if you go to, let's say, the Bajo Aguan region in Honduras, they might say something very different about how they see their own government. And so I think that for our electoral mission, we are going to work really hard at sort of focusing on the importance of inclusive democracy, which means, and CESPAD will take the lead on this, just really pushing towards stopping and calling out the US for their rhetorics, for their trying to influence the electoral process, while at the same time saying, we don't want intervention in this election. We want it to be free. We want it to be fair. We want it to be democratic. We want Hondurans to have the opportunity to vote. And obviously our role is an international election mission that will be working with CESPAD. We will be very particular about this kind of signaling from the US, as we always have in regards to elections, and then even when there is no electoral process. So I'll leave it there, and Ted, I'll pass it to you in case you have anything to add.
Well, I mean, there's so much that we can say, but I think I'm gonna, let Lucy say most of the next part of that. But I would add that we love CESPAD, and one of the reasons is because CESPAD is an organization that has been very principled over the years and has never taken money from the United States, just like Global Exchange. And that's crucially important in a situation like this. And it is really what the heart of what this alliance represents. And CESPAD has also really helped Global Exchange in the evolution of our election observation programs that go back to the mid-90s, when people were doing election observation all over the world. People were presenting that democracy was on the march and was going to be the inevitable future for all humanity, even as neoliberalism took hold. So when Global Exchange got involved in that, it was often organizing delegations that were primarily from Europe and the United States. And in cooperation with CESPAD, we have brought a much stronger kind of election observation effort together by including people from other Latin American countries who've experienced the United States approach to elections from the position of countries that have been abused by it, and have that experience in their own histories. So Lucia is the head of this mission, and has once again invited us and our other allies in the hemisphere to come to Honduras. And so we want to really focus the second part of the webcast on how can you get involved? What can you do? We have some questions in the chat, which we will certainly take a look at in a minute. So Lucy, what can we do? What is CISPOD doing? How can international people help? Why is it important that international people get involved in this process?
Sí, y lo mencionaba.
Yes, Karen mentioned this. There's been a geopolitical shift at a global level. There's a lot of challenges here. There's new values. There's a new way of thinking about human rights and democracy where that undermined human rights and democracy, and people are talking more about identity or cultural dynamics. And this, we're seeing a shift towards more authoritarian dynamics and leaders that a different ilk and policies that are very violent. So there's countries where, and particularly Honduras, because of its geopolitical situation, it's historically been disputed by organized crime groups, by drug traffickers. And so we have always been part of that story, and we're important because of that. That's why we had a coup, a state coup in the middle of the 20th century. If we had no value as a country, we wouldn't have extractivist projects happening here. And so it's electoral process that is playing along with the rules of the institutions. And so it's an exercise for legitimizing the trust that people have in the government institutions to strengthen the national situation. But it also sends a message to the political actors, reducing the possibilities for manipulation, for media manipulation through TV and radio. And so there's different dimensions to all of this. But what's always important in international observations is to have a global perspective, to be looking at things from the outside. It doesn't mean that we can't be Honduran actors and citizens, but we do have a different role. And it also increases our exposure to risks and different kinds of violence. And so it's important for people to support this mission and this project alongside Global Exchange and the Youth Platform. So this observation exercise builds on what we've learned in 2021. We're using digital platforms to support art documentation and providing reports to different entities about violations to electoral laws and protocols. Understanding that things are so polarized, we realize that we might enter a cycle of political violence. The most likely scenario is that all of the candidates are going to declare themselves to be the winners that very night. And so how is an observation mission going to step in and provide specific information, something that is grounded and that has academic rigor behind it, which is always required in these types of observation. So our political autonomy, which Amelia was mentioning, also increases our trust in the public's eye. And we are all willing and doing this from our heart. We're always doing these observation missions because we're called to do that. And we're ready for what happens on the 30th of November in 2025 in Tegucigalpa, as well as in many other municipalities where I'll talk about,
And
which I'll
Lucy,
talk
I
about
wanted to ask
subsequently.
you before we talk with Emilia again, you just told us before the webinar started that you had been talking with people who suggested that it would actually be a good idea to have as many international people participate with the CESPA delegation as possible. And
Sí.
honestly, before this webinar started, we were thinking to have a very modest number of people, but I just want to give you the, the microphone one more time to ask people to maybe put aside what they're doing. We recognize that the timing of the election, particularly for people in the United States, and this particular webinar is aimed at people in the United States and Canada, English-speaking people primarily. There's other outreach that's going on to our allies in other parts of the hemisphere, but it's going to be hard for people in the United States to come at Thanksgiving. But you'd be welcome. And so, Lucy, if you just want to reiterate, how important it is that people participate in helping CESPAD.
Sí, gracias, Ted. Justamente por
Thanks, Ted. Precisely because of the polarization, CESPAD is one of the few organizations that is proposing itself to be a national observation program. There's also international groups, and all of these processes come together. Karen knows about this. There's also the national observation programs, and those also meld with the international observation programs. It requires constant vigilance. We do require a high number of participants coming from abroad. We know that there are a lot of human rights activists. There's a lot of academics that focus on Central America and on Honduras. There's also a lot of journalists, actors, people that are working on the promotion for democracy. And so this is all moves according to specific procedures. There's rules, and there are protocols for electing our authorities. And so all that exists there to generate trust. And when people put on the CESPAD vest with the logo and they go out as a platform observation team, they receive a lot of respect. People respect the work that they're doing. People stop doing certain things when they realize there's a national or international observation going on. It might seem like it's not like that, but particularly with international monitoring groups, it really dissuades corruption and other dishonest practices that can be carried out at the ballots. For instance, when someone finds out in Honduras that someone is from an international observation group, they'll direct their questions to them over the national team members that are there to host that ballot or to facilitate that ballot. And so it's interesting to see who is actually handing out the relevant information that's necessary to participate. But there is, so we can say that we're blocking illegal activities. We're there to prevent those from happening. The teams also have the capacity to make denunciations in real time that go directly to the organizations so that there can be measures taken to reverse that process or to fix whatever issue, that and all of the ballots. So we do invite everyone to participate. We think it's a good opportunity here for you. There's good coffee and good food. So anyone that wants to join the observation process, that would be ideal. We need more people. We need more observers from international observers to be part of this exercise.
Okay, well, that's great. It sounds like it's an all hands on deck moment. And Emilia, you were part of the election observation. Oh, and let me just say, we have a bunch of technical questions about the observation, and I'll pass the mic to Karen in just a minute so she can tell us what you have to do, how you feed an application, what the holdups are. But Amelia, can you tell us about your experience and let us know what it was like and what you learned as a person and what things people might want to think about who are considering it.
Sure. Yeah, this was my first time being an international election observer. And it was a really interesting experience. Before I talk about that, I just want to add one thing to what Karen said earlier about this moment and this government and US intervention. I think that we are also in the moment when the US is led by people who are not concerned with keeping up appearances about defending democracy or human rights or the rights of minorities or women or the LGBTQ community or even the sort of like neoliberal version of human rights. They do not care. They're also not concerned about appearing corrupt.
Well, they're actively hostile. They're actively hostile to all those things.
Actively hostile, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the sort of gloves are off in a way that previous US governments maybe were interested in pretending to defend those things to a greater degree. And I do think that is an alarming and something that we should all be attuned to as to how brazen they can be at this moment.
Amelia, I'm sorry but before you go to the second part
Yeah.
of the answer that I asked you for, I think that's super important because that dynamic has been key to all the election observations that we've ever done, that there was at least the pretense of, wanting to play by the rules, play with the Democratic playbook, and now that's gone. So we're in a kind of ugly new world. Nevertheless, we're going to go there, and people like you are going to be with us because you understand. But tell us what it was like before and why we should be there this time.
Yeah, so I was in Tegucigalpa the whole time. We started out, all of the international observers through this program came together in Tegucigalpa, and we did some training about the process. We got to talk with people from CESPED. We had the opportunity to talk to a couple of the candidates or representatives from their campaigns, which was very educational, very interesting. And then different groups moved to different parts of the country. But I stayed in Tegucigalpa. I think there are a couple of things from that experience that were sort of emblazoned in my memory. One is, and if you haven't spent time in Latin America during elections, something that I think is surprising to people is how much the military is involved in the logistics of elections. That the military are who bring the maletas, the boxes of the ballots to the voting places. If you haven't spent time in elections outside of the United States, a lot of the voting places are schools, public schools. They're a wide variety of installations. And one of the things that we did during the mission was to go to the places where the ballots were supposed to arrive and make sure that they arrived, right? Like a really basic function of checking off that the ballots were getting to the places where they were supposed to be, because that is one area where things can go wrong, where fraud can happen by not allowing the ballots to get to the place where the ballots need to go, right? There's all these different points along the way where there's a possibility for fraud. So that was one thing we did, was making sure, doing a kind of inventory, making sure all the things that were supposed to be there were there. Also then, there were reports of people being not allowed to enter to vote at the place where they were supposed to. And a group of us would sort of like rush over to another part of the city to just be a presence. And this is where that chaleco, having that vest on, really made a difference. We were able to get in and out of spaces that other people were being quite literally physically blocked from entering, and make a fuss. And just our presence facilitated people getting to vote. And then the third thing was actually watching the count happen. actually just being there when the votes were being tallied at the end. And I will say one of the really powerful things about this experience for me, and as I said, I was living in Honduras during the 2017 election, was towards the evening that night, there was some reports of the military maybe making movements in the streets. And we were recalled early in the evening to go back to our headquarters because there was concern that something was happening to circumvent the vote. That didn't happen. What did happen was the vote was so overwhelming that it got announced, and at that point, Tegucigalpa came alive. The streets were full of people celebrating. Late at night, we left our headquarters to join in the sort of just explosion of joy that the city was feeling. And if you've spent a lot of time in Tegucigalpa, there are lots of parts of the city where at night the streets are really quiet. They're really dark. There's not a lot of life outside in the streets. And this was an extraordinary moment in Tegucigalpa as people just sort of spilled out into the streets late at night to celebrate the end of a long period of the post-coup government. Or the coup government that extended into the post-coup government. And so it was an extraordinary experience to be there at that moment and be a part of that. And I really hope I can go again this year. And I would really encourage all of you to go because it's really meaningful, and it really does feel like you're part of preserving something really important.
Yeah, and that's great. Thank you so much. And just also, things are going to be different this time. We don't know what's going to happen. It's a different moment. Thank you for your intention to come with us. Karen, can you tell us about if people want to be involved, what should they do? What's the next steps to take? How can you find out more and get involved in the process that's going to involve more trainings, virtual trainings before people go, so that there's a lot of information. We're going to try and have a lot more in terms of manuals and free visit construction of information for people, but just basic first steps. What do people need to do, Karen?
Sure. So I guess I should say the dates because someone already asked in the chat. So
Right.
we're looking at Thursday, November 27th to Tuesday, December the 2nd. So I don't know how many days that is. What is that, like 5 days, 6 days? Anyways, 5 days. And I think it's over the US Thanksgiving weekend. But we also, so those will be like your days in country. So you would arrive on Thursday, November 22nd or 27th, and then we would do trainings on Friday, which will be complemented by at least probably 1 or 2 Zoom sessions that we'll do virtually, obviously, prior to your arrival. Likely Lucia and folks from CESPAD will be leading it with assistance from Global Exchange and myself. And so then on Saturday, we might do, a couple of trainings as well. This is the day before the elections. Then you'll be sent to different areas of either different areas in the country, or some might stay in the capital city of Tegucigalpa, and like CESPAD will be responsible for telling the international folks where to go. And then the elections are obviously the Sunday, and we're hoping that everything will be okay and everything will be fine. And so you'll have the day after the elections, obviously, when the results are, still coming in, mostly on the Monday, and then you'll leave on the Tuesday, December 2nd. So we're asking people to apply. I think Karina she did. Yes, you can find the link, the Google Doc form in the chat. So click on that link. We'll also be putting it out more publicly, likely in exchange for or email from Global Exchange. And so we're asking people to put some effort into your application, because the better your application is, the more you show us all your skills. Do you have like photography skills? Are you a journalist? Are you a freelancer? Are you do you do lots of reels? Do you, I mean, there's just so many like creative things people do these days. I'm probably missing a lot, but tell us sort of how you would be able to contribute, what your experience is in election monitoring, and then we're going to go through the applications. And the reason that we want you to actually, work on your application is because there is funding available. And so we'll be going through the applications and sort of deciding what, based on the funding we have available, like what we're able to offer different folks that apply. I think that we've set the deadline for the end of September. So September 26th, that means there's not a lot of time to apply. So please work on your application as soon as possible and get it into us. And then I just want to say something really quickly, and I think Lucia touched on this a little bit in what she was saying, is that so we don't actually, from what I understand, and I've sort of been missing in action for this past week, so but from what I understand, there is still no procedure that has been announced by the National Electoral Council, which is the body that oversees the electoral process, the electoral authority in Honduras, for observers, national and international, to register officially as election observers. We expect them to announce that process soon. We're a little bit worried. We actually considered not putting out the application right now, but we do feel the fact that there is no procedure also is telling us a little bit more about the power struggle that's going on inside the National Electoral Council, and just the different concerns that have been raised about the pre-electoral period. The fact that there is no procedure for registering as election monitors is for me another reason why participating and being an international observer is very important. So we will keep pushing that process. Lucia and CESPAT are monitoring it closely. If there is a possibility, which we certainly think there will be, to be registered as official electoral observers, we will certainly be doing that. But I just wanted to raise that now, just so people know, and just so that people are aware of what's going on in the pre-electoral period, and we'll keep people posted about what happens. So I think that's basically all the information. I don't think I've missed anything, but feel free to say something, Ted, if I did, or add anything.
If you did, I didn't notice. Thank you. That was great. We're getting close to the end of the hour. Is there anything that our panelists feel like they'd like to say before we close things up and thank our audience? No? Okay. Is there anything, if you're out there, and we've noticed that 50 people have been here with us the whole time. That's not enough. So Karina just put in the chat ways that you can share this webcast, so that other people who might be interested in accompanying you to Honduras in November can also take a look at this. So we really need people to who have an interest in Honduras, who have some history with Honduras, to give this moment some deep consideration. Even if you don't go, staying connected, helping us with the at-home strategy is going to be important too. The last time there was an election in Honduras, Global Exchange facilitated 25 members of Congress getting onto letters to talk about what was happening. We're going to try and do some of those same actions, but the coyuntura, the political context of this is vastly different. And so we really appreciate all of those of you who came out today and took the time to really, get into this deeply. We're going to keep going in this direction. There's going to be people from all over the continent, as we mentioned, coming together in Honduras. So it's going to be, no matter what, a vital moment. It's one that's a little scary and a little risky, but it's also very important that we're there. You can see in the way that the dates are structured that we actually want people to be there a little bit after the election too, because it's going to be important that the people with the chalecos and whatnot are remaining on the scene for a couple of days for all kinds of reasons of solidarity, democratic solidarity, Karen, maybe you can close. Just, I know that one of the things that is so important when we think about Honduras, and we're always so happy to have you, working with us in these electoral moments where we step in, but you're part of the Honduras Solidarity Network. You know that it's, critical to maintain international attention to the many issues that connect Honduras with the rest of our hemisphere, with our hearts and the people from the Honduran diaspora who are up here. Can you just say a little bit in closing about, what the Honduras Solidarity Network does and will keep doing through this whole period?
Sure. So thanks so much, Ted, for asking that. I definitely obviously think elections are extremely important. You learn a lot following elections, because that sort of formal political power and partisan political power that you need to understand in order to keep accompanying the social movement in Honduras, which CESPAD is very much a part of. I just wanted to say quickly that the Honduras Solidarity Network, we've seen that some surprising, there's been some surprising messaging from traditionally more liberal Democrats in DC that are sort of jumping on the right-wing rhetoric regarding the Honduran elections. So if there's anybody out listening to us that is from Vermont, please get in touch with me. Senator Welch just put out a statement, I think yesterday, that was a little bit concerning. There's some great things that he says in there about Juan Lopez's assassination, Berta Cáceres' assassination, which are long struggles that Global Exchange, CESPAD, and the Honduras Solidarity Network have followed over over many years. I think election monitoring is part of the ongoing accompaniment that Global Exchange, CESPAD, and the Honduras Solidarity Network have done. And I would encourage people to continue watching the work that the three organizations do, particularly because we support struggles that also directly confront economic interests of powerful Honduran families that also align with the US government. So I'm talking about struggles and democratic processes from the communities, from the ground, like the struggle for justice for Berta Cáceres, justice for Juan Lopez, justice for all the folks in the Bajo Aguan fighting for their land, and also Ofrene, as well as Copin, indigenous movements. And so those are ongoing struggles that are up against, extremely difficult circumstances. So I would say that the Honduras Solidarity Network is always monitoring those, just as CESPAD and Global Exchanges. So continue to follow us. But if there's any immediate people want to follow up immediately, I would think that reaching out to your congressional representatives right now would be really important to start talking to them both about the electoral process and also these ongoing struggles that I mentioned that will be going on for many, many years.
Well, thank you. With that, Karen, Amelia, Lucy, it's been a great discussion, and I look forward to keeping it going. Thanks to everyone who tuned in tonight, and we'll be in touch. Take care.